we go. Hello, welcome to this meeting of the Oakville Town Council. This meeting has been called for the purpose of receiving an annual report from the Halton Region Police Service. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets?
We have no regrets this evening that we know of.
Thank you. Council, I always ask if there are declarations of pecuniary interest, but tonight I can't imagine there being any. Our sole discussion item is to receive a report from the Halton Region Police Service. I think I'll start by recognizing that our long-serving member of council, Councillor Jeff Knoll, currently has the honor of being the chair of the Halton Region Police Service. And joining us tonight from the Halton Region Police Service are Chief Steve Tanner, Superintendent Jeff Sandy. Superintendent Sandy is the district commander for the Oakville district, and he has brought Inspector Cole Repta and Detective Sergeant Ron Wright. Chief, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you now for your annual presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Your Worship, and certainly I'm just trying to start the video here. Certainly we are happy to be here as always, and really this is a virtual version of what we have done over the past few years, where myself and whoever was the superintendent and the inspector team or the senior command team in Oakville would come and visit with you as a group, as council in chambers at the town of Oakville. Certainly regrettable that we're unable to do that again this year because of COVID. So here we are in our virtual world, second best thing to appearing in person, and it is not the same. We all appreciate that, but it is the best that we can do to ensure that we can provide some information to you as a council or to individual councillors as you may have questions later on. We did not want to wait to later in the year. We wanted to do this at the request of council, and today's date was the best time for us to get together. I do have Superintendent Jeff Sandy and Inspector Cole Repta, and I will let them introduce the rest of their team when they speak to you in just a couple of minutes. My plan for tonight is just to do a very brief introduction and then turn things over to our command team in Oakville. I often say to councillors in each of our municipal areas, jurisdictions, or in our districts that really the superintendent is, for a lot of purposes, the equivalent of your local chief of police in Oakville. He, in Jeff's case, and Cole Repta, who works closely with him on the command team, will have answers to most of your questions. They will reach out to you at different times when there is a need to ensure that you are advised and up to date on a variety of different local issues as those may arise. And certainly you can reach back to them or through me at any time. So it's not like there is a barrier between us. We're in touch all the time, but these are your senior command staff for the town of Oakville, which is always, since the late 1970s, been known as number 2 district in Halton. No rhyme or reason to those numbers. One district has always been Milton. Back in the day was Milton, Georgetown, and Acton. Now Milton and Halton Hills. And we just did a similar presentation, myself and Superintendent Sue Biggs and Inspector Lority, to the town of Halton Hills just about a week ago. So we're sort of making the virtual rounds. So it's an honor to be here and to present to you tonight and to be here with our senior command team. And, I was sort of reflecting on the fact that the reason it is an honor and pleasure almost every time we appear before councils is probably threefold. One, we have incredible working relationships with our political partners, with the regional council, with Chair Gary Carr and all of you who sit on regional council, and with our municipal councillors and each of our 4 mayors. The other 2 reasons really are that we have a great deal of reason to be proud of the work that our frontline men and women do on a daily basis to keep all citizens in the region of Halton as safe as they possibly can. And year in and year out, and I have now been back here, Mayor Burton, it's almost hard to believe, and Councillor Knoll, it was 9 years ago, or 9 years and a bit, ago that we were going through interviews, and I came back here as the chief of police from Kingston to come back home to Oakville. There may be a couple of councillors newer that aren't aware that Oakville's my hometown, and I grew up here as well, and it's always near and dear to my heart. The other thing that makes it easier, I suppose, than what some chiefs must go through when they speak to regional or local councillors is that success that we have year in and year out, certainly in relation to major investigations, and we've had some extremely major tragic investigations in the town of Oakville and throughout the region of Halton. I can tell you some of those, if they're not solved, similar, like as for example, the terrible double homicide in Halton Hills recently. We had a double homicide in the town of Oakville, a shooting not too long ago. We cannot speak about details of that case, but I'm equally optimistic that that will come to a very good conclusion in the not too distant future. So our investigators, from our homicide investigators to our sexual assault and child abuse, internet investigators, and all of our local investigative teams, and you'll hear from the staff sergeant and others who oversee our Oakville Criminal Investigative Office, and some of the tremendous results that they had through 2020, and probably will be able to speak as well as some of the situations that have been resolved or solved early this year. And there is, as safe as we are, and certainly in our presentations to you who are on regional council, you hear from me and from the deputies and others and from the board chairs in all of our recent years, we are constantly the safest large municipality in all of Canada from a statistical perspective. But the one thing that's sort of weaved into all of that that I'm always most proud of is the fact that we solve more crimes per capita, per crime, than any of our comparable police services across Canada. So, you know, some of our lower crime rates, some of it is police work and crime prevention and proactive work and community safety and well-being, I think will continue to pay dividends for the region of Halton in the years to come. But some of our success when it comes to the lower crime rate is actually to the credit of our citizens. Some of that is demographic, certainly, and economically based. We are a very or fairly affluent community, not in all cases. We have poverty, we have homelessness, but we also have a very positive economic situation here in general in the region of Halton. Yes, that does attract criminals from other jurisdictions to come here and do break-ins to homes. It was a couple of years ago. Some of you will be very familiar with the very large-scale organized group that was breaking into very expensive homes in Oakville and throughout Halton, millions of dollars in property recovered. And we're not without fentanyl and tragic overdose deaths because of fentanyl largely, sometimes methamphetamine. And you probably read just in the last couple of weeks, it would be the largest drug seizure and arrest project that we have ever done here in Halton region. And I can say with relative certainty, going back to our first days as the region of Halton, but millions of dollars, 17 kilograms of cocaine, 3 kilograms of methamphetamine, and a kilogram of other drugs. And that is all here because street gangs and other organized crime groups are coming to the Halton area, or they're living here and conducting some of their business here. So do not want you to think that we are that we've been vaccinated against serious and organized crime, because there is no such thing. But by and large, our major investigative services and officers and offices, and our local detectives who will speak to you more about that this evening, and our local initiatives are paying dividends year after year for the town of Oakville. So it's my honor, as I said, to be here tonight. I will be here to answer other perhaps more general questions about the regional nature of the police service or other services that we provide. But I'd like to turn it over now to Superintendent Jeff Sandy and his team, and I'll have Jeff introduce the rest of them. And they have a very well-prepared presentation ready for you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chief, and thank you, Mayor Burton. First of all, joining me tonight, I have Inspector Cole Repta, the Operations Inspector for the district, as well as Staff Sergeant Ron Wright, who's our Detective Sergeant in our Criminal Investigations Bureau, and also Sergeant Milo Chimber, who many of you know, who does a fantastic job with our District Response Unit and the problem solving that they do with all of you and your constituents. I know many of you have met Milo and have engaged with him. So important that we have those people here tonight, certainly to answer your questions, but also to speak to their sectors, certainly of engagement. Before I go any further, I'd certainly want to thank all of you for the level of engagement and support that we've certainly enjoyed since I arrived in this district. I remember well first coming to the district and taking over from Superintendent Milinovich, and the mayor, Mayor Burton, coming by for a visit at that time. And his words, I think, have stuck with me, that he said, you know, if I can leave you with one thing, it is to expand and engage in all ways possible. And although COVID has made that particularly problematic, it has created certainly some opportunities for us within the district to be a little bit more creative in the ways we engage. But I think, you know, if I think back to the Pelian principles, and one that stands out is the ability of the police to perform their duties being dependent upon the public approval of police actions, and working so heavily with the public in that type of engagement. And I can certainly say within this district, many of the successes that we have and enjoy in this district are due to our working relationship with you and your constituents. So I would say, first and foremost, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity for us to actually engage with you tonight. So, Vicki, I'm not sure who's working the PowerPoint, but if you could just go to the next slide. So just a quick overview for you in terms of what we hope to cover for you tonight. Certainly I've introduced my staff. They're going to be here with me. I'm going to just go over quickly the organizational structure from the district level to give you a bit of a flavor of day-to-day operations and what Two District is actually made up of, and how it actually works. So bear with me. I know many of you perhaps have seen this or may have knowledge of it before, but I try not to make assumptions in that regard. So I'll do that quickly for those that haven't seen it. I'll then probably branch into a bit of what I call our anchor for all we do within the district, and I think organizationally as well, the community safety and well-being model that has served us so well, and we look upon as our anchor to many of the successes that we have in the problems that we encounter within policing, but particularly within this district. Ron Wright, Detective Sergeant Wright, will then branch into a focus on crime and enforcement, particularly from the Criminal Investigations Bureau side of things, some higher level investigations, and certainly speak to some of the analytics and answer some of your questions around trends and some successes, and perhaps some opportunities for us to do some things better as well. And then Sergeant Chimber will cover traffic safety and enforcement, and from that perspective, deal with those things much like Detective Sergeant Wright does with the criminal side of things. And then Inspector Repta is going to concentrate a little bit on capitalizing on opportunities for continued improvement, and certainly some of our goals for the future, both short, intermediate, and long term, based upon certainly our goals and KPIs that we've come up with within the district, blending from our larger organizational view. And then we've obviously left some time at the end for question and answers, but certainly happy to answer questions as we go along as well, so please feel free. But there'll certainly be some time at the end for that to take place as well. So if I could have the next slide. So this is basically our organizational chart from the district level. So you'll have me as the superintendent that the chief alluded to. I have a support person as an executive assistant. And then it branches down into the uniform and criminal investigations side of things to start with as our basis. So within our uniform patrol, we have 4 platoons, which are our uniform and emergency response to calls that either come in as 911 calls or come in through our communications bureau as general calls for service, whether those be high risk or whether they be nuisance calls. Our uniform patrol are the front line, and in my view, perhaps maybe like the backbone and most important job that we have in policing, because they are generally the people that are going to calls with very little information, and we rely on their thinking first and their ability to think through problems and collect information and then analyze it and come up with some solutions or call upon people that can help them. So there are 4 platoons. Each of those platoons has a staff sergeant who is the manager. He or she will work from the station. They're not out on the road. They manage that team, and they have 2 sergeants that are out on the road as their supervisors. And they will do the supervision out on the road. So if somebody's going to a call or units are going to a call, the supervisors do their job out on the road, and the manager has overarching command of that particular platoon for their shift. They obviously work 2 days and 2 nights, 12-hour shifts, and quite proud of their response and work, particularly over the last year within COVID and the, I would say, difficult, volatile, and certainly ambiguous environment that COVID has presented to them. They have done a magnificent job, I think, under those constraints. Attached to those platoons is Sergeant Chimber's district response unit, which has 8 constables to it, with Sergeant Chimber being the supervisor. You can see that there are traffic projects, ride and provincial projects, certainly traffic and nuisance calls that many of you maybe and your constituents have called upon for help. Milo is, generally speaking, that first line of contact that we ask to identify what the problem is and then come up with solutions with his district response unit to actually address those. And he and his unit do a fantastic job of that. If you look to the left, or at least looking at my page here, you have the Criminal Investigations Bureau, which is headed by Detective Sergeant Ron Wright. He has 2 persons teams as well as 2 property teams. So you would be talking about crimes against persons or break-and-enters or auto theft investigations at a bit of a higher level. He also has someone that works with vulnerable persons or seniors liaison, as well as a separate street crime unit, which Ron will speak to, which takes care of many different investigations that are quite miscellaneous, but is a good breeding ground, I would say, for excellent performance in terms of criminal investigations. There is an offender management position there as well, which is a constable's position, which that person can be shared with other units, but is responsible for the management of offenders that may be on parole or out on release, and make sure from a risk mitigation standpoint that is taken care of. And then last but not least is a risk mitigation team within the district. So we certainly, you probably by the end of the presentation will see that we truly believe, at least in this district, in creating a learning environment for the members that work here. And that learning environment, we hope, by allowing them to have excellent mentorship, but also the room to make mistakes and get better from those mistakes. We try to run as many secondments through different units as possible for the members that work here. The risk mitigation team is a 4-person team where we draw them from the platoons, and they're allowed to work for a 5-month period up in CIB to be mentored by Detective Sergeant Wright and his teams. And then they go back to their platoons after that 5 months, and hopefully they've developed some skill sets, some knowledge, awareness of some other problems and ways to solve those problems, and then spread that back to their platoons, where we take 5 more people up. So 1 from each platoon, 4 more people up, 1 from each platoon, and allow them to rotate through that learning period as well. On the far right, you'll see the Community Mobilization and Engagement Unit. That is really a sector that is attached to RHQ, or headquarters, in the Regional Community Mobilization Bureau, but it has been decentralized to move. We found it a very good working relationship to have them actually embedded in each district with a team that helps us solve the problems within within the district that may have crossover to their specialties. So whether that's high school liaison officers or youth team officers, vulnerable persons team, as well as a community mobilization team, which has a social worker attached to it. We find that the cross-referencing and communication between that bureau and everybody else in the district helps us solve a lot of, at least come up with some really good solutions to some different types of problems that we may encounter that wouldn't normally be solved by Uniform or the Criminal Investigations Bureau. Any questions on the org and what everybody sort of does in the district from those perspectives before I move on?
Councillor Dudek.
Okay.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Where would scams through the internet, Facebook, social media, or people getting emails, solicitation, I'm thinking mostly for seniors, but given the amount of scams going on either through the phone or social media, who should they contact?
Right. Thank you for the question, Councillor Dudek. Certainly, I know Detective Sergeant Wright is actually going to speak. It's an excellent question. He's going to speak directly to that.
That's great. Thanks.
Those generally might come through a uniform officer actually taking the initial report, but through their manager, it would then get filed to our Criminal Investigations Bureau because it would be a bit of a higher level and it may take a bit more time and expertise to actually solve those crimes. But we actually have people within that Criminal Investigations Bureau that would be assigned that particular type of investigation. And if they needed support from our regional investigative services through our fraud unit, they're here in the building, almost right next to them. So it works out quite well. But I'll let Detective Sergeant Wright. Thank you for the question. Okay, I'll just move to the next slide then. So certainly, as I stated before, this certainly I don't think is new to any of you. The Halton Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan is where we anchor a lot of our performance around. And I think really from an incident response, risk intervention, social development, and prevention pieces of that plan, we endeavor to identify what the problems are and then work very upstream with upstream activities and call the right people to the table to help solve sometimes some complicated pieces of human interaction or problems that come from those. And I think that lens that we apply to the work we do here is, I think, definitely connected. If we can even go back to the Pelian principles, it's definitely connected in terms of all of us as a community coming together to try and solve some of those problems that perhaps in the past we were not integrated or collaborative enough in doing. And I think that has sort of been the anchor point for us to make sure that our performance meets the standard from that degree. Can I have the next slide? So this diagram really pretty well lays out the way we go about utilizing the community safety and well-being model or program. In terms of a senior leadership group taking a look at what those problems are once they're properly identified, and then deciding at situation tables who we should call to those situation tables. So whether it's social workers or members of the justice system or key allies or stakeholders from other emergency service areas or the healthcare system. Those situation tables, we try and put the right people around them to look at a problem. And I think oftentimes what happens with that collaboration is that the right people are actually looking at the problem, and maybe it's two people or three different sectors that take on that problem, but it's identified properly, and the actions that stem from that are generally speaking the right actions that we need to actually attack the problem and help those people that are at the situation table. So I would give you a good example of this. Just after Christmas, back in February, we had, many of you may remember this, but we had quite a few calls to an address on Lakeshore Avenue for a gentleman that was causing major disturbances. So they were barricade calls, calls that lasted, 8, 10, 12 hours at a time. Many different resources being called, not just from the police, but from gas, electrical. The cost factor around it was enormous, but also how many resources were being tied up each time we went to this type of call, where the gentleman barricaded himself, was either becoming violent or it stemmed from mental health pieces. So within the district, I will say that on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I hold an operations meeting. And at that meeting are my detective sergeant, Sergeant Chimber, the ops inspectors, Inspector Repta, as well as the community or RCMB, Regional Community Mobilization Sergeant that's in the district. And it was at that time that we actually looked at this as a case study and tried to utilize RCMB at that time to give us a hand with what the core problem was for this gentleman. He had never had a criminal record in the past. He actually worked in the communications field, had his own company, and due to COVID and some real pressures around finance, had lost everything. And in doing so, there became some alcohol dependency, some drug use, and certainly some mental health concerns with his wife and 3 young kids, really fearing for their safety based upon his degrading mental health. And this is the perfect situation where we should look deeper into it, and we should utilize everything we can from a community safety and well-being perspective. So we did. We formed a situation table because putting him back into the justice system over and over again certainly wasn't helping. He would get out and then not receiving the help he needed would sort of fall back down in many of those ways, and then that would just be another call for us. So we engaged a situation table. We brought CAMH in, as well as health professionals and others, certainly from shelters and those that have a subject matter expertise in dealing with these types of problems. And at that table, it was those people that came up with the solutions for him to get him back up on his feet. I can tell you that the family is actually from Halifax, but all of those systems helped to actually get the person back up on his feet, to the point of him actually writing a letter into us to say, this person that I had become, I didn't recognize. And without the help of getting from those people to get back up on my feet and get healthy again, I would have lost everything, my family and, all that I am. And we could have had a much more dire outcome. So the family has moved back to Halifax. I know they are back up on their feet and moving towards certainly some success with other family members around them out there. But I think without this type of collaboration and that CSWB approach, maybe we would have had a different outcome. And so that's just an example of how we would attack those things, certainly from an ops perspective in the district. But the lens is one we're always applying. And I think that's pretty important for high performance here in the district. So can I have the next slide? So certainly enhancing access to mental health support, that's part of the reason I mentioned that particular problem. But we know that certainly Deputy Chief Wilkie heads up, certainly from our perspective, the Halton Reach Out Center for Kids. We certainly run into quite a few problems. If we just look at the rates of ED visits to mental health, from mental health illness to hospitals, certainly between the ages of 15 to 24, we know that ROC has been an amazing spot to actually get help for this particular group of people. And I think, our uniform support runs into this, but they, in collaboration with our Criminal Investigations Bureau, do link up on these cases to try and find places like ROC that may help solve that problem, or the problem for that particular age group or that particular mental health problem. It is a holistic and collaborative effort, and that's really why what I want you to get from particularly this slide is, whichever the stakeholder is, we just want to collaborate to the maximum effort to find the right solution for the problem. So next slide, please. So I know there was some, Councillor Dudek, you certainly asked about older adults and the scams, I think this is a good lead-in for Detective Sergeant Wright to take over and certainly begin speaking about some of those scams, but also the isolation and older adult sector that we have and that we deal with within the district. And I think that may be a good point for him to take over and lead into a discussion on his the Criminal Investigations Bureau. So, Ron, if I can turn the mic over to you for a few moments, please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Superintendent. I would like just to give kind of a overview of the Criminal Investigations Bureau. And I know we had an overview of the teams, but just a little bit more depth in terms of the types of investigations that each team would take on. And that will lead nicely into answering the question about some of these scams. So we have a person's team, and now typically they're going to take carriage of missing person investigations. They'll take carriage of online crimes such as harassments, extortions. One trend that we have seen kind of increase during the pandemic is sexual-based extortions, which I can get into a little bit more later on. But in addition, they also take carriage of death investigations and serious assaults. Our other person's team, commonly referred to as our robbery team, primarily investigates robbery offenses, but also thefts, organized thefts, such as porch thefts that have seen a slight increase with our reliability on Amazon and less reliability on in-store shopping. One of our property teams, which is commonly referred to as our break and enter team, they investigate residential and commercial break and enters. One of the crimes that has substantially decreased during the pandemic has been our residential break and enters. And of course, that's attributed to the fact that a lot of people are working now from home. And so that's been a big deterrent for that crime. Our auto team, our second property team, investigates stolen autos. And as I'll touch upon a little bit, one of the more common trends that we're seeing now is relay or technology-based auto theft. This is a situation where through key fobs for our vehicles, criminals are able to basically relay the frequency to a computer, reprogram a fob, and steal your vehicle. And there's specific vehicles that they look for. I'd be happy to discuss later on if you're interested. We have our street crime team, what the superintendent alluded to. So this is a bureau support team. They'll offer investigative support through surveillance and other investigative techniques. However, they have their own portfolio as well, which encompasses mischief, street level drug investigations, and theft from autos. So the situation where someone has broken into our car to steal the contents, but not the car itself. We have a risk mitigation team, which the superintendent also alluded to. So this is 4 officers that come up for 5 months at a time to gain additional investigative experience and knowledge that they can take back to their platoons and apply to initial investigations and initial call taking, as well as provide a resource to their shift in terms of some investigative techniques. And we use them as an initial incident response to supplement investigations at our own office. So depending on what's happening, they may be investigators in a shooting or a stabbing, robbery, a break and enter, whatever kind of comes across their plate during their 5 months up in CIB. We also have an offender manager who works with the offender managers throughout the other districts, but is in charge of monitoring high-risk offenders and enforcing any conditions that they may be on in order to ensure that these people aren't continuously reoffending. And finally, we have an older adult investigator, which falls within this current slide. So we do see some of these common scam techniques that are appear to target older adults. And so there's a few listed here on the screen: the CRA, tech support, bank employee, grandson, granddaughter. They all have something generally common in that they're trying to get funds out of people, but it's typically asking for Bitcoin or to send gift cards, things that are less traceable investigatively for the officers. So to give you one example, some of these Google Play cards, there's no way of tracing them once you give the serial number associated to the card. And so they'll ask for, $4,000 in Google Play cards, or else, your grandson or granddaughter will not be released from custody. And so, from an education perspective, our older adult investigator, she sends quarterly emails and newsletters throughout a variety of community services that provides information on these scams. We were doing a lot of in-person presentations. We do a lot of this now virtually through activity coordinators at long care homes, as well as utilizing the resources and services within the region to get information out as much as possible from an education perspective. From an investigative perspective, we're following up on each one of these with the hopes that it's actually local. However, a lot of these are embedded overseas. By the time you get down the rabbit hole, so to speak, what you find is that you're now into international bank accounts, and you kind of come to the end of the road investigatively. So we like to support a lot of this with education and preventative measures as best we can. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So there's just some numbers on this slide that I just wanted to review, speaking kind of some of our core investigations that we typically are dealing with year in and year out. As we see, almost all of them are down, and so COVID will have played a role in some of them. As I mentioned, the residential break and enters. However, the auto theft, I would say that COVID has hampered us slightly, because with people working more from home, their vehicles are parked outside on a driveway, and that gives these suspects an opportunity to figure out which vehicles they're looking for and exactly where they are. So we spent a great deal of time and effort into relay auto thefts this year. A few of our recent media releases has highlighted some of our successes. Just last week, we arrested a crew of 3 individuals from Quebec that were involved in multiple relay style auto thefts from Oakville and throughout the GTA. But we see our robberies were decreased 23%, and 90% of our robberies that came in, we cleared either by charge, or we cleared in terms of getting enough information that satisfied us of who was responsible. But for one reason or another, we didn't lay a charge that went before the courts. Our residential break and enters were down 45%, which again, I think a lot stemming from COVID. However, as the chief alluded to earlier, we had quite the problem a few years ago that we really invested heavily in education and intel with regards to these groups that are coming into the town and targeting specific houses. So I think that has played a big picture in over the years, us really curtailing this type of crime and knowing that Oakville is not a place that you want to come to break into a house, because we will pursue you. Auto theft, we have a 6% decrease. And as I said, I think a lot of COVID has played into that, because with the technology of how easy it is to steal a vehicle now, combined with vehicles being in driveways and criminals essentially being able to shop for what they want, we haven't seen as much of a decrease, but we've pumped a lot of resources into education in terms of the types of vehicles that are being targeted, the ways that you can protect your vehicle from being stolen. And in fact, our auto team used to investigate our commercial break and enters, but we actually switched that to our residential team, so that auto team could focus exclusively on these auto relay thefts. which has shown to be quite beneficial in some of our recent successes. And our theft from autos are down 25%. So this is individuals going into our unlocked vehicles, about 90% unlocked vehicles, and taking items out of it. As you can see near the bottom of the screen, we also investigate and put substantial resources into missing persons and death investigations. This includes overdose deaths. We don't have any outstanding missing persons, which I'm quite proud of, and I know the superintendent is as well. So we front load those investigations from the onset in order to find anyone that's missing, because we know a lot of these people are vulnerable to some degree. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So just a graphic to represent, 5 years ago, where we were. And as we can kind of see, each line is representing a different offense, and they're all kind of downward trajectory, which is what we're looking for. Based on our numbers so far, we have some projected stats to the far right in red. And we can see, for example, theft from autos in 2020, we had 420, and we're looking at 277. So even within that, and again, everything anchored in community safety and well-being, there's a big education proponent to everything that we try to, at timely events throughout the year, remind people of your best bang for your buck, I would call it, to prevent and protect your property. So we move on to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight a couple success stories from last year. You may be familiar with these investigations. So to the left, we have Project Panther. So this was kind of a unique, almost COVID-style auto theft investigation. What the suspects were doing is they were taking advantage of the COVID regulations as it pertained to going for a test drive in a vehicle. So they would attend high-end car dealerships in Oakville with fraudulent ID and take the car for a ride and never return. So we were seeing this series throughout the GTA, and it certainly was also happening in Oakville. So parallel with our criminal investigation, we are also doing a lot of prevention and speaking with our car dealership owners and trying to provide them with as much information as we could. As they were starting to become aware of the trends, the suspects switched their method of operation and started to stage collisions in order to obtain these vehicles. So they would find a vehicle that they wanted, stage a slight collision, and then essentially steal the vehicle while individuals were exchanging information. So this was obviously a massive concern for us because it opened up real concerns with public safety. So we really amped up our investigative avenues and resources into this. Ultimately, we were able to arrest 3 individuals that were responsible for these types of crimes. One came from a stage collision where we were fortunate enough to collect some video, which gave us a license plate. That license plate we knew was registered to a fictitious business, which had multiple Mercedes, because Mercedes tended to be the type of vehicle they were looking for, registered to this individual. Through that, he was ultimately arrested. We found multiple stolen Mercedes at his house, as well as fraudulent IDs and MTO documents. This didn't stop it though, and so we continued with our education component with the car dealerships. This led to an idea of putting a tracking device in these test drive vehicles, so if they were taken, we would know where they went. And this seemed to be very successful, as we ended up arresting 2 other individuals that stole a car, and we were able to find their location. We conducted an investigation on them. We arrested them. We conducted a search warrant and found over a pound of fentanyl, which is the purple substance in the picture, along with $10,000 in cash, 2 further stolen Mercedes, and Xanax pills. So to give you some context, that's 453 grams of fentanyl. And fentanyl is bought in a tenth of a gram, and a tenth of 1 gram could cause an overdose death. So 453 grams potentially saved a lot of overdoses. And it was quite clear that this this organization and this facet was stealing these vehicles. They're ultimately being shipped overseas, but it was really to further their drug trafficking. And so through this investigation, we actually took down two competing criminal offenses, which would be the drug trafficking and the stolen autos. To the right, we see the results of a double drive-by shooting that occurred in Oakville in May of last year. So some of you may have remembered this, and it was quite memorable because this almost never happens in Oakville. So it was a rare event. And what made it especially brazen was not just that the shooter returned on two occasions within an hour to shoot at a house, but that they had targeted the incorrect house. And so you can imagine the sense of fear that put into that community. Through our investigation, which is our, I don't want to say a checkbox, but there's always a list of core investigative principles and techniques that we go through to collect information and evidence, and then that will narrow us or send us in a certain direction to continue on with our investigation. And so we were able to identify a suspect fairly early on in this investigation. However, as we conducted our investigation, we needed to figure out where these items may actually be located, and that was through our surveillance. And through that, we located and actually found out that our suspect was also dealing drugs. So we had a parallel criminal investigation with a controlled drugs and substance act investigation. And through that, we wrote and applied for a series of search warrants at different residences throughout the region. And in addition to our drugs and indicia of trafficking, such as the cash, the scales, we found a rifle that was used in the shooting. And so that was obviously a massive break in the investigation. We also seized a vehicle that had burn marks in the roof, which was consistent with ejected shell casings. So we were very happy to be able to bring this brazen crime to a successful end and hold those accountable for this one. And those are two of many success stories that I wanted to share with you. I think that's it for me. If we move on to the next slide, I'm happy to answer any questions now or at the end.
I think you're best to wait to the end, partly because when we're displaying the slides, I can't see all of council anyway, nor I doubt you can either.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think from there, if we move to this slide, thanks for that, Ron. Great overview, and appreciate the explanations as well. We'll move to the traffic safety and enforcement, and I'll turn it over to Sergeant Chimber to go over these particular sectors that he has a lot to do with. So, Milo, if you're on the line there, please go ahead.
Superintendent Sandy, and good evening to the council. Thank you for the opportunity to have me here tonight. I know it's my pleasure to work with each and every one of you every day. I'm going to go through some numbers, and I think those numbers are reflective of the positive cooperation and communication that we have, that we've built, and I hope to continue to build. I manage a group of 8 traffic safety specialists, and we investigate and look after traffic safety, but also nuisance crimes in the town of Oakville. And I always encourage all of you and the citizens, if there's any concerns, by all means, call me. Through our emails interactions, my cell phone, my email is always there. And like I said, the results I'm going to briefly go through now is definitely reflective of our collaboration and cooperation. Over the last year, we've seen a 24% increase in summonses issued. In addition to that, we've also issued in excess of 13,700 provincial offenses notice and conducted over 1,500 roadside tests, which is indicative of the proactive enforcement that members of my unit and the district conduct on a daily basis. Also, in the last year, we've had an expedited response to traffic complaints. And a lot of that is due to our open communication throughout. We've seen a 42% decrease in motor vehicle collisions in the district, and a 10% decrease in traffic complaints. And we continued our strategic participation and engagement in related programs such as Safe Start, Canada Road Safety, which is coming up next month. Project It Can Wait, something I'm incredibly proud of, which is our distracted driving campaign, where we partner with regional public health, our paramedic services, and public works. Also in the last year, we initiated Project Noisemaker and Project POP, both working very closely with our citizens, our residents associations, and our town councilors. If we can go to the next slide, I'll touch on Project Noisemaker a bit. As many of you are aware, Project Noisemaker was born last year due to continued and consistent complaints about unnecessary noise, modified mufflers, unsafe vehicles, aggressive driving. And it was through our partnerships and our communications that we developed this multifaceted approach to target this. Again, dealing with not only enforcement, but education and collaboration with our partners. Throughout my presentation, you're going to hear that we partner and we work with our municipal compliance partners with the town of Oakville, who I'm very thankful to have a very great working relationship with. In implementing Project Noisemaker, which I considered a success last year, we laid more than 1,400 charges region-wide. 574 charges were for no or improper mufflers. 396 charges for unnecessary noise. We had 12 racing stunt driving charges, and obviously the vehicle impoundments that went with them. And 40 vehicles were removed from the roadway for various defects. We have reinitiated and re-implemented Noisemaker again. Building on it, we've expanded with a partnership with the Ministry of Environment. Building on our education, I have Constable Mark Terrazzo working with our training unit and Ministry of Environment to initiate and implement a training program for our uniform officers to identify what to look for with these vehicles and to increase our enforcement efforts. I'm very, very happy to say that I've been in touch with Selena Campbell and Margaret Boswell from our municipal compliance. And we are starting this month to twice a month do proactive patrols in identified areas concerned for motorcycle noise. I know that the Lakeshore Corridor has been a consistent cause of concern from residents. I can tell you that I've heard you, and we will be proactively out there very shortly enforcing noise bylaws and offenses. If I can go to the next slide, please. Project POP is another area of concern that's project that was identified, initiated, and implemented for nuisance crimes and noise in our open spaces and parks last year. This is a project where we work very closely with our municipal compliance partners again. I know that they've also expanded their program to utilize park ambassadors, and they've increased their complement of compliance officers. Last year, this was a success with over 450 patrol hours. Over 1,000 bylaw offenses were laid. 87 provincial offenses were laid, and 2 criminal code arrests and 4 charges and a pellet gun was seized. I'm very happy to say that I'll be reaching out to Mr. Jim Barry, Selena Campbell, and John Maddox to start the planning for this year's edition of Project POP. Again, I can't do my job without your feedback, and for that, I'm very thankful for it. Next slide, please. In addition to our proactive work, we also have our programs with regards in the area of priority populations. Hashtag prevent, where we deliver local response in response to global events. I'm very proud, and I'll further talk into our district response team's equity, diversity, and inclusion training. And our programming designed around diversity, equity, and inclusion. For example, our project book and diversity engagement forum. And our continued commitment to victims with our victim restoration service strategy. Next slide, please. Sir? I'll turn it over to Superintendent.
Thanks, Milo, and thanks to you and your team for the work you've done over the last couple of years in terms of traffic safety. So I think importantly, I'll begin this slide by saying, clearly Chief Tanner and both deputies, but particularly Deputy Chief Wilkie, who many of you know is heading up the CACP Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. We run to really embrace as an organization starting in 2020 under Chief Tanner's leadership and the board, the police board as well. The concept of what a greater program of equity, diversity, and inclusion would look like. And I think the work was slow moving at first, but we wanted to do it correctly. Certainly organizationally, we went back to staffing a full-time sergeant within RCMB who oversees many of the critical initiatives aimed at engaging the diverse community in Halton. And I think I speak to that clearly. When I was a sergeant, I was the diversity officer, sort of working alone, not with an RCMB team around me. And I think through the chief's leadership and certainly Deputy Chief Wilkie's leadership, that staffing piece within RCMB and the support that Sergeant Smith now has around him is key and core to some excellent solutions through equity, diversity, and inclusion. So what we certainly had is a RCMB or centralized model, which then began looking at how to staff the districts with diversity officers, whether that's one on each platoon or two on each platoon, and build a network throughout each district of diversity and equity and inclusion officers. But also importantly, to look at our internal support networks as well as an important part of the team. In building that, clearly what we wanted to do from a district level was embrace that organizational initiative and cascade that into our district. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that Sergeant Smith has built certainly the personnel and the scaffolding from the larger organizational piece to be able to support this in the districts. But what we wanted to do, certainly in 2 district, was start out with piloting some pieces where we took, for instance, Milo's district response unit team and began actually lesson planning and through some active engagement and collaborations with our outside and our internal stakeholders, some important regular training dates for his team. And in building that, we then wanted to cascade that into each of our platoons so that the same program would be given to all of the platoons and have a dotted line to RCMB or the central unit, Sergeant Smith overseeing many of those programs and collaborating with Milo and our district staff sergeants to engage and build for the future proper EDI programming. And I think, we're in the beginning stages of that right now, but it's key and core to creating that environment that is open and inclusive. And, certainly from a mentorship and equity standpoint, so important to breeding that environment certainly within the district, but I think within the organization as well. And, we definitely didn't just want to talk it out. We definitely wanted to put some actions in place that would promote this type of activity for all the different reasons that we know equity, diversity, and inclusion is so important. From a performance perspective to a talent acquisition perspective, but really it's the right thing. It's the right thing to produce a high-performing environment where people feel accepted, they are open to different ideas, to change management, and all the things that we believe equity, diversity, and inclusion helps embrace. That is the environment that we certainly wanted to build upon from that wave that was started right from the top with the chief in terms of the organizational piece. So we made a concerted effort, and we are building that equity, diversity, and inclusion programming within the district as well. And I think it's well worth mentioning that that is one of our priorities within the district. So if you want to go to the next slide for me, please. I'll let Milo just give you a bit, kind of a capsule of what that looked like for him in terms of building that first bit of training for his team, because that is where we are going to sort of filter or seed that down to the rest of the platoons within the district. So go ahead, Milo.
Thank you, sir. Really proud and to talk about this subject. Working with my team, we developed a phased approach in our EDI training, equity, diversity, and inclusion training. The first phase, including members of our team, we turned to our own internal support networks and invited them to attend our day-long training. The purpose of this training was to have open and frank discussions and talk about our police and community relations, our police and internal support network relations, and ways we can improve our relations, and what the expectation of us was. We started with our internal support network because these were the officers that we work with, we're comfortable with, and we wanted to have open and frank conversations. We wanted our officers to be able to ask questions and create a true learning environment where there was no silly question. Everything was open. We wanted to learn. We received tremendous feedback from our first phase, and we're in our second phase of training, which is preparing for our training. In preparation, we worked closely with Sergeant Ryan Smith and Staff Sergeant Dave Todd of our training unit, developing a lesson plan, a template to follow and to build on. Currently, I'm in the process of building the second phase. And in the second phase of this training, we're reaching out, building on the foundation and reaching out to our community. We're reaching out to our community, again, to have open discussions, to learn more about the community that we serve, that we work in, that we live in, and want to invite them to have further discussions, to have us learn more about that community and in ways we can improve relations and what the community's expectation of us is. I'm currently working with Sergeant Ryan Smith and Staff Sergeant Dave Tutt. We also work closely with the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion and consistently assign webinars and partake in webinars where we learn more on the subject. Not only is this assigned, but it's something that we go out and look for just to expand our knowledge. I'm happy to announce that in May, at the end of May, our second phase, we've invited members of Alpha Law, our Islamic community here, members of LAD, and members of Serving with Pride of our LGBTQS plus community to come and speak with us. And that's going to be on May 26th. I am tremendously excited about the training. I look forward to building this, and there will be a third phase that we'll start building at the end of the second phase. But tremendous feedback so far.
Thanks, Milo. If we could just have the next slide. So clearly, it's important for us to build that, but we are not siloed in that approach to our EDI training. Obviously, our dotted line to our training bureau, who's been doing excellent work over the years, as well as Sergeant Smith and our CMB, are really our supporting pillars to the work that we are endeavoring to accomplish within the district and the environment we're trying to create. So, Milo, appreciate your work on that. Before I go into introducing Inspector Cole Repta, who's going to take us through certainly aligning much of what we do in the district with our business plans and our goals and objectives, I just wanted to remind everyone, I think at the beginning of each year, we do send out the guide for the Oakville Town Councilors electronically to everyone, which deals with much of the information for parking complaints, traffic complaints, quality of life, complaints of suspicious activity or nuisance complaints. That guide is updated yearly and sent out to everyone. So if there's anyone on this call that hasn't received that guide, please, we're quite responsive. If you just send either Cole or myself an email, we'll be sure to get that out to you. We hope we haven't made a mistake and not been able to get it out to anyone on the call, but certainly for any of the counselors or anyone on the call that requires that guide, please just let us know. And with that, I will say, obviously, probably from what you've heard already, my job is made quite simple because I have excellent people around me, many of whom have already spoken to you tonight in terms of Ron Wright and Milo. Lots of subject matter expertise, but new to the district this year was Inspector Cole Repta, who came with a wealth of experience as his time as a staff officer, as well as with the Strategic Management Office and also in emergency services. We were very fortunate to be able to grab Cole for our district, and he's done a fantastic job as the operations inspector. So I'll just allow Cole to go on with our goals and objectives and our alignment with the planning process. So Cole, please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Superintendent. So first, I just want to say good evening to Mayor Burton and members of the council. I know this may be the first time many of you have met me, but please don't hesitate to reach out to ask me any questions, or if you have any concerns, reach out. My number's on that guide, as Superintendent Sandy's just alluded to. Or if you want to just say hello, feel free to give me a call anytime. I'm here. So far, you've heard kind of where we are today, and you've heard where we were in the past. So I just want to touch on where we're going in the future in Oakville here, and more importantly, how do we get there? And that's how we determine that is based on, like most things in policing, it's based on evidence and analytics, and we use things like public consultation to kind of guide us. And through that information, we build things like the strategic plan. If you haven't read the strategic plan yet, I suggest that you take a look at it. There's a wealth of information in there. Now, we use that to guide our actions in the district. And specifically, there's 4 themes at the end of the plan that we overlay in terms of what we want to do here. And that helps set our goals and our objectives for all the officers who work in the district. And I'm just going to highlight what those themes are. And that's, you've heard already about the community safety and well-being. Theme number 2 is outreach and collaboration. Number 3 is capability and engagement. And number 4 is leadership and excellence. And from old plans, the difference in that last one, which is I think a key, is the leadership component. And we expect all our officers in 20th Division that work out of Oakville to be leaders. And that means to be leaders on their platoons, to be leaders in the community, and to be leaders in the province. And that's important. That's an important piece of that, those 4 themes. If you can go to the next slide, please. So using those 4 themes, we built 4 priorities in the district here. And these priorities are distributed to all our officers, and they help guide our officers' actions. That's not to say our officers can't do any work outside of these actions, but this is the 4 themes or trends that they focus on. It becomes a part of their everyday working life. Within that, we come up with goals, and that's a broad, like a big vision of what we want them to do. And then we come up with objectives, and that's like the deliverables that support those goals. What brings those goals to life? What can we do to bring those goals to life? I'm not going to read through this verbatim, but I'm going to highlight a few things. The first priority is crime trends, and this is something that Ron talked about quite a bit. And if you look at within the goals, some of the language we use community needs, enhanced early detection, prevention, community strategies. All that language, it speaks to that collaboration that comes with community safety and well-being. We've talked about that quite a bit today. And so how do we put that to use in the district? Superintendent Sandy talked about those 3 meetings we have every week where we have all the internal members at the table. those internal members go to our external members, and we have them come to the table, and that's how we attack these problems. So specifically, when we talk about the objective-wise, we increase the percentage of officer-initiated calls for service. I'm going to talk about that in the next one because that's really specific to traffic, and that's going to be our second trend. And then things like reduction in the related or repeat incidents, and those are those porch thefts that we talked about earlier tonight. What happens is in the past, maybe we'd have 10 officers go and take 10 reports and investigate those 10 incidents in silos. But now that's vetted through our CIB, through our investigators, all into one area, and they're all investigated together. And we've had success in things like porch thefts and in vehicle thefts using that approach. Next slide, please. Number two isn't going to be new to anybody. It's traffic safety. And I think since I've been a police officer, that's always been one of our top priorities. That's for the last 20 years. And here we'd like to focus on, impaired driving, aggressive and distracted driving, and commercial motor vehicle and safety enforcement. And that's what our district response team does. That's Milo's team, focused specifically on that issue, as well as many others. And we've heard about, in terms of district goals, we've heard about projects. We've heard about Safe Start and Noisemaker. This all speaks to those goals. Now, getting back to that, the traffic portion of it, all the different district objectives are about increasing enforcement. And this means increasing targeted enforcement, not just going out and driving around and hoping for the best. We know that as a police service, about 60 to 70% of all our police engagement happens through traffic stops. So this means that we can impact people's behavior at this point of contact, probably more so than anything else we do. And again, but this needs to be targeted. So that means, what is the problem we're trying to address, and who does that problem impact, and what can we do about it? And that's our approach here in the district. Can we move on to the next slide, please? The third priority, which Milo just talked quite a bit about, is equity and inclusion for all. And here we're talking about our priority populations. It really comes down, to me, to minimizing the impact of crime on our victims. And again, how do we do that? And that's that community engagements, internal engagements. We do that through leveraging the external and internal partners. We look at the objectives. We look to increase the number of hours spent on working on those related initiatives. We identify our priority populations and those crime trends, and we pool them together, and we put our focus on those because they impact the most people. We can go to the last slide, please. And really, by doing that, what we're doing is ensuring, and we've said it before, and we'll say it again, we're ensuring that our officers are not working in silos. This is truly a team effort. As it is with the number 4 priority, which is mental health and addictions. And so in Halton Police, as a region and in the district, we have a layered response to this. What this means is, really, again, we try to create better outcomes for people in crisis. We do this through better education of our frontline officers. We do this through using a regional resource, which is the Mobile Crisis Rapid Response Teams. And those attached to those are people with medical professionals who really have the expertise we need out in the field. We have a critical incident command structure here that we can initiate at different levels that can address from the highest priority critical incident and mental health concern to ones that can be dealt with at a frontline level. And so this all comes down to, when we look at our objectives, to me, it comes down to developing officers through increased training and professional development. And that's really the key. And I think Superintendent Sandy is going to talk about it just at the end here. That's the key in our district, is ensuring that, although specifically to mental health and addiction, our officers are not professionals. But if we can ensure they're equipped with every tool possible, then they can respond to the mental health crisis as best we can, using all the tools available in the district and in the region. And then just the last slide. I'm going to turn it back over to Superintendent Sandy and to the Chief, and we'll answer any questions you have about any of those things or anything that you've seen so far tonight. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Cole. An excellent overview of our goals. To sum up, certainly from our command team perspective, we wanted to keep this at about 45 minutes, which I think we did. Really and truly, it comes down to this for at least my perspective in the district. It's my job to try and create the optimal environment for this leadership team and all members of the district, both civilian and sworn, to have an environment that they can thrive in, that they enjoy coming to work, that they look for challenges, and that they absolutely, certainly want to support the community and their teammates and certainly the organization at an optimal level and really exceed anything that they might expect of themselves or that others may expect of them in the goal of support. How best do we support all of the community and all of our teammates in the best way possible? And the creation of that environment, I think, is really at the top of my list in terms of every day trying to work to create that type of environment with visible leadership and also with the support of the police board, all of yourselves, and certainly the chief and deputies. I think that is, at the end of the day, if we can create that culture and that environment within this district and maintain it and have it grow over the years, I think we'll be in a good place in terms of offering the right type of service for our entire community. And I will leave it at that. Certainly ask the chief if he has any closing comments or if he wants to enter into the fray now with some comments, or I will leave it open to the floor for questions through you, Mr. Mayor. I will turn it back over to the floor.
Thank you very
Great.
much. Chief, do you want a final word?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things, because I think some of them may come up in questions. I can touch on them quite quickly. One is, first of all, community safety and well-being. Certainly a cornerstone of what we do here in Halton. And a lot of that would not have been accomplished without Mayor Burton. And when, again, in his role as board chair over many years. And I think at some points, some of us would think that the mayor may have grown up with Sir Robert Peel. I know he's not quite that old, but he has Sir Robert Peel in his pocket on a pamphlet, if not personally, and it really lived the community safety and well-being approach as the chair of the Police Services Board. So thank you very much for all that you did to drive CSWB forward and the senior leadership team that we now have with the region and so many other external partners. The other thing I wanted to say quickly is thank you to your town staff. I know some of our members touched on that tonight, but certainly particularly over this past year and with some of the enforcement in and around COVID, it is our desire to try to keep our frontline police officers away from COVID enforcement as much as possible. And the town of Oakville has done a yeoman's job in relation to bylaw enforcement and a lot of the work around COVID-19 and other bylaws in the town, and a great relationship with your staff. So thank you very much for that. I am pleased to say that we have still, and I never want to jinx us, to date, we have had 22 positive COVID cases within our police service of just over 1,000 people, which I think is remarkable. Certainly the support politically at all levels and locally and through the region, and we've always been in a very positive position when it comes to personal protective equipment and the behavior of our frontline officers. So we have been very fortunate in that regard. I did want to say, I know someone would probably ask me about mental health. Mental health we do see as on the rise, COVID related and otherwise, and certainly mental health coupled with drug and alcohol addiction, but even more so the use of extremely powerful drugs, fentanyl in particular, over the past 2 to 3 years is on the rise. We deal with a number of overdoses from fentanyl and far too many suicides and attempt suicides. So that does have a cost on our frontline members. We work with them, and we have a very robust mental health support program, including a full-time organizational wellness unit staffed with a staff sergeant, a constable, and a on-demand psychologist on contract, and we provide a lot of those services in an off-site, very confidential location. I have not been there in the 3 or 4 years that it's been in existence there, and I think that's a very important part of how we try to ensure that our frontline officers and civilian members in a variety of high-risk positions are well looked after from a mental health perspective. Fentanyl is an issue in Oakville, in all of Halton, and all of Canada, and it's one that we need to continually address from an education perspective, as well as interventions whenever we need to be there. Quickly, I wanted to mention a program named 3 Words. I don't know, has everyone on council, if you put your hand up physically, I can see you, I think, heard of the app 3 Words? Some have, some haven't. It's an interesting program that we've become involved in some time back now, but basically it's technology which is rather mind-boggling, but every 3-meter square section of the world is covered through algorithms with 3 distinct words. So if you download the app, What 3 Words, to your personal device, you will, and you give it your location, it will give you 3 unique words, unlike anywhere else in the planet. And we can track you for safety or health and safety or medical issues and concerns. So I'll give you an example. We had a hiker out in a very remote area of the north part of Halton, came across a firearm that had been discarded there probably some time ago, had no idea where she was at that point. We had no idea where she was. We could try to pinpoint people through cell phone technology in different ways, but our dispatchers were able to talk her through downloading the app, and it led our frontline officers right to that location. It's a tremendously valuable tool that you could use with your own families to find each other, kids, in large crowds or whatever you may be. But certainly when someone is lost or injured, perhaps in a remote part of Oakville or Halton, it's invaluable. So when we spoke to Halton Hills about it, I think they were thinking about posting something to do with it on all of their trails and walkways and those sorts of things. So I just wanted to mention that as a very interesting piece of technology to those that might not have heard about it. The other thing that we've just done recently is gone to a QR code. We're using it primarily right now for COVID information related data and updates, but what our staff were able to do, I'll tell you actually, Mayor Burton will get a kick out of this because I was speaking with Chief Harding, retired, and Jim said, Chief, what you need to do is come up with a pamphlet that your officers can give out to people and give them updates on COVID and what the rules are, and have your name on that piece of paper. And we talked about it, and we realized, first of all, we can't hand out paper because we might actually be seen as transmitting something. And the day we printed that piece of paper, it would be out of date. So we have a QR code that we've developed. All of our officers should have it by now or soon. It'll be on their devices. It'll also be on a laminated piece of paper. Anybody can scan that. It'll also be at the entrance points to our facilities. And that will direct everyone to our website and to specific locations for each of our municipalities where we will have the most up-to-date information that all of you have provided to us. So our corporate communication staff do not even have to update that information on an ongoing basis. It's all done behind the scenes. That QR code, hopefully one day, before too long, when COVID is behind us, we can just repurpose the QR code and populate it with other up-to-date information that we want to provide for whatever reason. So I just wanted to let you know about those interesting technological things that we're doing, because Mayor Burton and Councillor Knoll will know that I am not the most technical person, but I can now turn my computer on almost by myself, so I'm getting there. But thank you very much. I just wanted to pass on those couple of things. Thank you to the team tonight, and certainly open to any questions.
Well, we have at least 5 questioners lined up for you, starting with Councillors Dudek, Hazlitt Thiel, Adams, Sandu, and Palmer. Councillor Duddick?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the officers involved. I'm glad you raised the various things like Project Noisemaker, POP. Those have been huge successes for us, especially in our ward in particular. As you mentioned, the Lakeshore Road frontage, we had concerns with motorcycles, but I know several of my colleagues the same thing. And I did want to acknowledge and thank you, Milo, for taking the time to participate in several virtual meetings with a residents association of Councillor Chisholm and mine, who's been involved with POP and traffic, and various other concerns. And the fact that you were able to take that time, attend, and comment firsthand was very, very much appreciated. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I don't know who handles the social media for the police, but I must say it has been excellent, at least this past year, if not more, but especially this past year. When something is posted, we can immediately share it with people. And again, through your presentation, the Lakeshore Road incident is in Councillor Chisholm's and my ward. And the communication that went out for that particular incident was so well organized and delivered that we did not have one of the constituents or residents in that immediate neighborhood contact us to either complain or ask questions. That is phenomenal to have something like that happen. And the one thing I guess I wanted to ask with traffic, is there anything that we can do? And it might be a budgetary thing. So whether through cameras or something of that nature to assist you in traffic enforcement.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for your comments, and we're very proud of our corporate communications team and the overall approach to getting information out, and we've got some great people in that area of the service as well. The one thing I often talk about, and I've talked about with Halton Hills just a week or so ago, and it's allowable now. I would recommend, and I would certainly support photo radar. You have as council, you have the ability to utilize red light cameras, and I think they are valuable, in especially if we put them in the high risk sorts of intersections. And on the photo radar side, I have always thought, I remember photo radar when it came in the first time from the province, and I was a younger police officer then, but I was a police officer. It made me slow down driving, and if it had that impact on me, I think it would have it on others. It has a couple of other spin-off benefits, and Bill Blair and I used to talk about this quite a bit in relation to Toronto, and he said, he wanted at the time the ability to put in cameras for illegal left turns, which cause issues in the city, as you would know, not so much in Oakville. But he would make the point that if we had someone make an illegal left turn and then a police officer stopped that car in rush hour, first of all, we're going to compound the traffic issue. And then we're going to have a citizen or someone from out of town who's upset with the police because they got a ticket. And when it's done by like red light cameras, I received a red light camera many years ago in the city of Hamilton. And it's anonymous, it's less of a fine, it's no points, you do not have to identify, and you cannot identify the driver. That's one pitfall, perhaps, if it's high speeding incident, you don't know the driver. But the photo radar is much more than a tax grab, in my view. I think it is a legitimate contender to make the community safer. And if people are fearful of getting a photo radar ticket and they slow down, I think that's great. So I would encourage, it's a council decision, it's council expense, and it's not really connected to the police service. But it also provides a different level of traffic enforcement where, again, police officers, if I can say it this way, are not seen as the bad guys who are pulling people over and giving them the tickets, even though they were breaking the law. People often don't see it that way. And then we don't spend overtime sending officers to court for tickets, because the technology is much different in that way too. So long-winded way of saying, yes, there is a way.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Thank you very much, Mayor Burton. And thank you to all the presenters. Lovely to hear such an integrated, collaborative approach to police servicing. It really, it's comforting, and I hope that some of the public watches if they weren't watching tonight. I do have a question about evidence and analytics, because I think that was a great statement, that you base your strategic plan on evidence and analytics. And one of the questions I get as a town councillor is, well, how do we know that they're doing enforcement? We they're still speeding on this road, councillor. What have you done about it for me, councillor? Is there a report, and perhaps I'm just not seeing it because I'm a town councillor, that tells us about the level of enforcement from a speed perspective, and that's in the different parts of the ward? I saw a slide that had a bunch of dots, and I don't know if it jumped out at anybody else, but there were no dots in the southeast corridor. And I was I just wondered if someone could maybe help me understand where we get some of that data.
Yeah, I think the superintendent may have an idea of how much we can drill down within the district. We certainly have data just on the town of Oakville, but if the question is, for example, how many speeding tickets were given out on Rebecca Street between Fourth Line and Dorval, we would have to have a look at the analytical side of that. Jeff, do you know if we can do that right away?
Yeah, I think that, it's a great question. I think we definitely can get the analytics for that. We have an excellent support unit through strategic management that seems to drill down once we actually ask them for what it is we're looking for. So I think what I would do, best solution for that is through Milo. If we could get exactly what it is, what parameters we're looking for in particular, we can then go to the analytics section and ask for that, whether it's a number of PONs issued or within a certain sector or a certain street or certain area, then I think we would just need to give them the particular parameters of that and ask for that back. So Milo, perhaps that's something that you can actually make a note of.
Thanks, Jeff. The other thing I wanted to say is what happens quite often is we have people have perceptions, and they try to pass those perceptions on to you as their counselors, and then you're hearing from a number of people. I used to deal with a dear old gentleman, George Beer, was a town councillor in the city of Belleville when I was the chief there, and George would get all kinds of calls about speeding, and when I talked to him on Brasher Road in the north end of the city, it was 7 or 8 citizens, and I'd say, George, there's 47,000 citizens. But when you think about the actual citizens themselves, what we do often is have somebody, sometimes we can use volunteers, but we may have a complaint about speeding on a certain residential street. I'll use Riverside Drive, maybe, where I grew up as an example. And we may have someone go out and measure what is the extent of that issue. And often it would not be worth putting a police officer there to run radar. It would be a situation that would be easily addressed if the problem is speeding through photo radar. So it may be another use for that. But sometimes we do some analytics on the actual complaint and find out that it is not as great as what the person may think.
Thank you very much for that explanation. There are some areas in the southeast that we see officers attend and almost as a deterrent. And I'm very supportive of photo radar. But it is just interesting that if there's anything that even breaks it down by ward. I'm not looking for streets, etc. But understanding the kind of enforcement levels that are occurring within a ward is helpful information from my perspective.
Absolutely.
But thanks very much.
Yeah, we will have a look for that for you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chief, for being here along with your entire team. I really appreciate that. I have two things to thank you for and two questions. The two things I wanted to thank you for, Councillor Dudek already mentioned, but I wanted to mention them again. Project Noisemaker has been really fabulous, and I really want to congratulate Mark Tarasso, Constable Tarasso, for his work within social media as well. I know every time he puts up a post of his latest catch, it just gets phenomenal amounts of activity around it, and so it's good all around. I also want to thank you for Project POP, which I know that Sergeant Milo has worked with Councillor Lischina and I on a couple of locations, and I think it's been very helpful. So I look forward to those continuing and to working with you. I know the heat map that you showed at the very beginning of town, showing where there were, I think it was showing where there were speeding problems or aggressive driving problems maybe, and it obviously showed that Trafalgar Road was a problem, and particularly during the construction that's going on, I think that's been a big issue. So I appreciate the work that's been going on around those things, and I look forward to it continuing. My two questions were about the break and enters. So I was amazed at the statistic that you put up that there would have been a 45% drop in the number of B&E cases in the residential sector, I think it was. Which doesn't surprise me that there had been a big drop during the COVID pandemic when everyone's working from home. But my question is, do you think that will really continue if people start going back to work again in the office setting again? Are we going to see that return, and are we prepared for that?
Yeah, it certainly may return. I think Detective Sergeant Wright is still here as well, and certainly closer to the break-ins in Oakville than I am, but my numbers are they went from 188 in 2019 to 109 in 2020, and the 5-year average is 190, so down significantly, as Ron had said. Yeah, some of it is probably daytime entries when people are home more often than they were. We have more technology now. I think people are investing more in and I would recommend it. The doorbell types of cameras around residences. We're solving a lot of crimes with technology, but I would expect some to come back. I don't think I don't think it is break and enter thieves complying with the stay-at-home order, if I can say it that way. They are going to come out or come here from Peel or Hamilton or wherever they're coming from, or be homegrown criminals. Sometimes that happens too, right, Ron? But I think it's a trend that's probably going to go back up a little bit after COVID's over.
Okay, so you're ready for that when the time comes, and yeah, I don't think the thieves are staying home because of COVID. I think they're staying home because there's people in the homes protecting their homes. Makes it harder to do a break and enter. The second question I had for you is around the mental health response teams, which I'm not sure if you really got into it, but I know it was gone through a lot of question and answer around what's Halton doing around responding to a mental health call and bringing along with an officer a mental health specialist. Can you describe that to us? Because I think that's not readily understood by most of the population about what you're really doing on those mental health calls.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it has to be there's got to be a multi-approach to this. So one of the mainstays of our response to mental health problems, when we can have them working, is our mobile crisis rapid response teams. Now they came in a number of years ago now. Some of that is that is a police officer, perhaps more highly trained than the average police officer in issues of mental health, working side by side in a police vehicle with a trained mental health worker. And in our situation, most of those people, if not all, are psychiatric nurses or have been at some point, and now they're working with us full time. The dollars for the psychiatric nurse side of those partner teams is paid for through our LINs. Now the LINs are all changing, and but funding is still in place. So we have 4 full-time crisis response teams. You would probably remember Councillor Adams. I know Mayor Burton and Councillor Noel will. We applied to the province for increased funding because we need more of those teams. Because if you think about, you cannot staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with 4 people, nor can you with 4 teams. So we were hoping to double those teams through funding that was to come from the province. The province, as they do sometimes, they announced increased funding for mental health, and we were told late last fall, and this was as we were going into budget presentations to regional council, we fully expected to receive funding probably for 2 more teams instead of 4 early in 2021. Something happened at the province, and we have not received that funding yet. I know Mayor Burton has had some discussions a few months ago now, as have I, up until more recently with Assistant Minister Tobolo on the health side, who's more directly connected with mental health. I am told that there may have been some sort of an error, and once we got into the new fiscal year, which we are now in, because the province goes April to April, as opposed to most of our budgets, that funding would be forthcoming. So I'm still waiting for that, and I'm still pursuing that. So we're hopeful that we can increase the number of mental health professionals who are paid for by the province to work on these dedicated teams. But the other thing that we've done is, and COVID has put a little bit of a wrench into the training, we've also committed to put every one of our frontline members through, I believe it's a 4 to 5 day intensive mental health intervention training. We believe we would be the first police service in Canada to put all of our frontline officers through that, so all of them are trained to a much higher level and have a much greater appreciation for those that are going through a variety of mental health situations. You will probably also remember that last year we entered into a cooperative partnership with Axon, who previously only sold tasers. Now they're much into data management and digital evidence management, but they're also into video training, and we partnered with them on some interactive high-tech training. So it's a 3D immersed experience that our officers can go through dealing with mental health scenarios virtually. So it's a very unique virtual training in relation to mental health, which again, our kudos to our training staff who pursued that partnership, and we continue to go down that line. So those are all things that are being done at the same time in different ways, and we'll continue to train our frontline staff, I believe, to a higher level than many of our comparable police services.
Thank you very much for that answer. I think that really helps to provide some light on that particular issue and how it's being handled.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, for reminding me of that surreal meeting with Minister Tobolo. I mean, it was the first time I've ever experienced it, where a minister says, I've got all this money for increased psychiatric nurses for the police, and no one will take it. And I said, I'll take it all. And,
yeah, that's right.
and we haven't even got 2.
So, yeah, we haven't got the 2 yet, but we are pursuing that.
It was a very generous offer, not yet delivered. So there you go. Councillor Sanju, you're next. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the Chief and the team for being here today. I don't think I've met everyone in person myself yet, but welcome to you all, and great to meet you in person, kind of.
Thank you.
So thanks again, Chief, and I also wanted to just point out that really great initiatives from an EDI perspective. I thought it was actually quite interesting to see the metrics around that and what you've been implementing in the team. The one question that I didn't have answered from what I saw today was, what are you doing internally? Like, have the police done an internal diversity audit just to see what our team actually looks like, besides what we're providing to folks outside of the service?
Yeah, we have. We've done quite a bit, and Mayor Burton was certainly very much involved when we went to an external agency and brought them in to do some work with us along those lines as well. We also have continued to develop our own internal support network. So we have one in particular for Black officers, for Black members of the service. We have one that's recently started up for female members of the police service, a women's network, internal network, and one that's been around for quite a while on the LGBTQS side of things. And we've tried to access and leverage some of our internal support networks. And Jeff, I know Superintendent Sandy and others have worked along with the development of these groups and with the complex and the reasons for doing them. And we also continue to look at our own internal makeup from a gender perspective as well as from a diversity perspective. We are not at the level that we wish we would be at this point on either of those, but I think certainly our recruits that are being hired over these past 3, 4, 5 years are more diverse and are more gender balanced, which is going to help us. I heard an organization, I think we're still about 23% female police officers if we break it down that way, and certainly that's not 51%. But there is an organization that is looking now at being 30 by 30, 30% by 2030, and I just listened to a presentation on that through our EDI, Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion group the other day, and that's probably a good way to look at it and to give a target for the future moving forward. So we're not just, organization is not chasing a target that they're not concentrated and focused on. So we continue to look at that and try to make inroads into the diversity of our service, because we do want to and need to be more reflective of the community. People need to see themselves in our officers, for example. Now, there are some interesting stories when we get into working with some of our diverse groups, and we have a very robust and well-developed Chiefs Diversity Forum with representatives from a variety of different groups. And Superintendent Sandy and I were on a call with one diverse group, and I don't know if you want to tell a little bit of that story, Jeff. I would.
Yeah, sure. I think, we've been invested in this work for a number of years, and I'd have to echo the chief's comments. Mayor Burton's been a big supporter of that, as well as the police board, back to when I was a sergeant in diversity, to be honest with you. So it's a long road, but I will tell you, we did meet with a Black mentorship group probably a month and a half or so ago, 2 months ago, Chief, and they asked me to sit in on that call with them. And certainly from my perspective, it's important to be honest and transparent. They asked some of the same questions about our makeup, what is our diverse makeup in terms of whether it's gender or visible minorities. And we answered, to the chief's credit, and I think to the team that was there, answered those questions with honesty and transparency. I will tell you, it was interesting because I grew up in the Gill region, and have a lived experience for sure, as probably one of the only visible minority families at the time when Peel was just Bramalea, and not Brampton and Mississauga. So I was there to add some of that lived experience to how that relates to me doing my job and some of the things I support within this culture at Halton now. And it was interesting that there's a lot of trauma in that group, I think, through lived experience. And one lady in particular, after answering questions and going through that, she actually had made a comment to me that alluded to the fact that I almost wasn't black enough in terms of what she was looking for.
I'm sorry.
So, yeah. So, and I think it is quite interesting because certainly we did have a darker officer there as well, who she contrasted me to that. But it was an interesting piece because you have to try and understand the trauma where the question comes from, but you also need to have an understanding of that is some of the mentality that's out there that obviously needs correcting as well. Because I think all our experiences make us richer, but also, the comment was a bit offside, but at the same time, I think for us, it's important not to react emotionally to those types of things and be goaded into that type of comment, particularly when it's of a personal nature, which we didn't. And I was proud of that and happy about that. But it was a different experience, I think, for the chief and for myself, for sure. It's the first time I'd actually heard that one. That's some of the discourse that we have, though, and I think we have to be accepting of that. We have to absolutely be there for that and answer as honestly and transparently as possible. And I think really let our work stand for itself. We are just beginning, and it's a long haul. Long after I'm gone or the chief's gone or many of us, I think the work will continue, and our goal is to get it to the spot that it will continue and get to be greater, so that many of those questions don't come up or those comments don't come up in the future. But that's the story the chief, I think, wanted me to tell you. So
that is. Thanks, Jeff. And it was an interesting experience for both of us, and I was as shocked, I am sure. But it's perceptions, and they're not always accurate.
That's it.
I did share the story with my mom and dad, and they thought it was pretty funny.
Well, thanks for that, Superintendent Zuni. I think that the pendulum probably swings in both directions when it comes to being somebody diverse. So this might be the first time you've heard this, but I'm sure you've heard many other things. So I appreciate you reaching out from a professional perspective. I think that was really helpful, I think, to everybody, probably. My second question is actually nothing to do with UBI. I had a second question about just police education and leadership in the community. I guess the question is just generally, what can council do to support you more? We have in the past in Ward 7, and I think in other wards as well, had community drop-in sessions with our community development officers or with Sergeant Chimber, ensuring that the police actually has that forefront to actually get to the community and have a conversation about some of the things that might be beneficial. What are some of the other things that we can do to help?
Well, and those things, I would never undersell those things. So please keep doing those and work with the good sergeant and other people and our officers, our frontline officers and liaison officers. That is one thing that's key. I think the other thing that sometimes counselors, and I'll say this more generally because I've been in a few different areas and cities across the province over the years, some counselors receive more information than normal citizens, and sometimes either aren't or don't put themselves in a position to share that. So where the real value of a night like tonight is not just to educate or share information and network with all of you as our counselors from Oakville, but it's also for you to know now firsthand from us and from our staff within Oakville what we are doing and when you're, approached by different citizens in different ways that may have different views about what the policing are doing or not doing, when you have more information that you're able to say, no, that's not exactly right. Let me share this with you. Or we just heard a presentation the other night, and yes, the Halton police are doing Project Noisemaker again, or they did give out almost 8,000 provincial offense notices last year. They are doing traffic enforcement, and the solvency rate on criminal offenses is high, and thankfully our break-and enters are down by 50% last year over the year before. It arms you with things that you need to know, and that's what we're here for, is to share information. And I think too often police chiefs and police leaders keep a lot of that information to themselves, and that old knowledge is power thing. And we really believe as an organization that it's better for everyone, including ourselves, to share information and statistics. So if you have other questions that come up that you need more specific answers to in order for you to go back to a constituent and give them a better explanation, we're all in it with you, and we'll get that information for you. So I think that's another way that as counselors, you are a part of the governance of what we do, and we welcome your input and feedback to your citizens.
Thanks, Chief. And I think the last is just a quick recommendation. I think all of the councillors would benefit from. We've been hearing a lot of complaints, and I think one of the other officers mentioned this earlier, hearing a lot of complaints about porch pirates recently. If we could get something on social media, if you've already shared it even already, that would be beneficial for us. I think we'd be able to retweet, share, and help our community understand what they can do to kind of be a little bit more vigilant with their packages on their porches.
Yeah, and it's, I know when we did our presentation in the north end, it is happening. It hasn't been happening yet to the degree that some people may think that it has. But having said that, there is a little bit of an upswing to those thefts now, which, I mean, I'm amazed sometimes when I come home myself and there are parcels sitting on the step that I had no idea were being delivered or left, and so it's good information for us to continue to put out. If you have things delivered, have neighbors pick them up, or whatever you can do to try to protect. Is there anything specific in that area, Ron, in Oakville, that you would say that it's alarmingly on the rise, or thefts of FedEx and Pure Later packages that are being left, those sorts of things?
Well, I mean, we do get some series. We've had a few this year where we have made arrests. We have a lot of one-offs, and investigatively we go through all the boxes to check, collecting CCTV, interviewing witnesses. But we have made a few arrests, but as the chief alluded to, they're not as prevalent as you may think. I think part of it is it's new in terms of COVID. We've never had the porch pirates before, but with all the packages getting delivered through FedEx, and it's going to increase opportunity, and certainly we investigate each one. But yeah, having a neighbor pick it up, or knowing you might be home when they're delivered, those are going to be preventative strategies. If you have a camera that might be in the area, or even a doorbell camera, those might be preventative measures that they may move on to somewhere else. But yeah, specifically nothing other than, getting those packages in the house, and or having someone home, or a neighbor or relative swing by and pick them up.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you all. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Palmer, and then Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, through you, your worship. Thanks to the chief and his staff today for being here and your presentation. Certainly share the sentiments and gratitude that my colleagues have expressed for the various great programs and initiatives that have come from our police service. So I do have a couple of questions. And I guess I'll just start with what we ended off with. I did have a resident reach out to me, and I think it might have been something in the mayor's newsletter, something about the increase of bicycle thefts. And I was wondering if you could make a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, bicycle thefts have been a concern for us for quite some time. We do investigate them as completely as we possibly can. We do have some technology that we, in an in-camera session, I may talk more about. I'm not sure who else is on the call tonight, but we do have some technological ways of investigating bike thefts, and they've been quite successful throughout the region. High-end bikes, particularly, it's not uncommon for a bike to be $5,000 to $10,000 now. The street Cervelo sort of bicycles, so they're obviously a target, easily sold on Kijiji and otherwise, and so we follow up a lot of stolen property, including bikes. Sometimes the owners of the stolen property find their property on Kijiji, and then we get back into the investigations there. And there is a program that's just come out in relation to bike thefts. I can't remember the name of it right now. Was there anything else on that particularly, Ron? Sorry.
Yeah, so there is some new technology coming out. We do a lot of browsing through social media, looking for the bikes to be resold. That's a lot of the areas where these criminals are not, stealing them to use them, they're stealing them to sell them. And so we'll conduct undercover operations online in order to try to purchase the bike back. And then, the odd time we might get, a serial bike thief. It's not very often. And that gives us an opportunity to go via search warrant and recover more bikes at a residence if we can establish that. And protecting your property, a lot of it is kind of fundamental and overlapping, locking it up, keeping it in the garage, stuff like that. But we do a lot of online research and investigation in order to recover that property.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that extra information. So my second question is around the police on park patrol. And I know Sergeant Simber had mentioned proactive patrol in some areas, but I think that might have been for Project Noisemaker. So my question is around the police on park patrol, is there going to be any proactive patrol in hotspots, or can we, reach out and let you know of some hotspots that we're hearing about in our communities as the weather starts to get warmer and we see more people and youth out in the parks?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. It was with regards to Project POP, and we are in the planning phases for our second edition. And I always welcome any feedback on where we should be targeting our response. So by all means, phone call, email, online reporting, we definitely utilize all that information to ensure that our response is always targeted and our resources are always sent to where they get the greatest results. So by all means, I believe everybody has my contact information. I encourage you to reach out by email, by phone call, and definitely it goes into the operational planning. Obviously, I'm not going to get into where we're going to be targeting, but I will always welcome any feedback, and we'll listen, and we'll definitely target our approach and provide feedback.
Great, thank you, and thank you to you for always being so responsive, and all of our requests to you. It's really appreciated, and something I wanted to touch on, which one of my colleagues brought up, Councillor Haslett-Leo, about the analytics. That's something that Councillor Sandhu and myself reach out to Sergeant Schimber about that, about those analytics in our ward, to understand how the enforcement is being done and how much enforcement is being done. And it's kind of broken down by major roads. And I know that's something that you work on putting together with on the back end with all the analytics there. But the comment I wanted to make on that is the report's great. We always push it out to our residents. But for myself, like, for example, if there was 20 tickets for speeding issued on 16 Mile Drive from January 2020 to September 2020, I don't know if that's too much. I don't know if that's too little. I have a hard time understanding the benchmark, and I was wondering if internally that's assessed and how that's assessed internally on, whether these are appropriate amounts of enforcement, or whether it's up or down. Like, how is that all looked at?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, and because really, if we gave out 1,000 tickets or we gave out 10,000, what would the difference be for that particular road, and what's the risk of that particular road? So we try to have a look at traffic enforcement to a degree from a perspective of where the traffic behavior causes the greatest issues. So there are some in the policing world who would argue that we really should just do traffic enforcement where the most accidents occur. That may be a design flaw, but it may also be a bad intersection, or an intersection where people are rushing through a red light more often because they've just got off a higher speed highway. So is the enforcement on a quiet residential street as important if there's never been an accident there? Of course, the citizens believe there is because children are playing out near the road, and you don't want to see a vehicle go by at what you perceive to be a really high rate of speed, and it may be. But those are often few and far between, so it's hard for the officer to be there at the time. Again, photo radar may be a different option for that. And you could say that photo radar was deployed on Queen Mary between this street and that street for 20 hours last month, and there were 10 tickets given out, and maybe there was 1,000 vehicles that were not speeding. But those sorts of analytics are interesting. I know Mayor Burton often says, or often used to say, we don't want a report on something that we're never going to use. So we want to be careful that we're not investing too much in putting data in and spending a lot of money and putting that data in with a lot of detail, and we're never going to use the data that's in there. So it's a balance. But if there's an area of particular concern, we can certainly address it, and Milo and his team will look at all of those things for you.
Great, thank you for that. I think another piece of information and data that would be beneficial to counselors is the enforcement that's done in our community safety zones. That's something that we've worked at the town to implement in across wards in Oakville, and so to understand the enforcement that's being done in those community safety zones to share with our residents would certainly be useful information as well in the future.
Absolutely, that's a great question. Thank you.
And okay, so my last question is on it's for Detective Sergeant Ron Wright. Actually, you made a reference to new technology on car theft, refiguring key fobs, and so I just was hoping to learn more about that, and then also wanted to understand when these new types of trends and theft emerge, what kind of education we're doing, and how is Halton Police pushing that out? Is it just through social media, or is there any other way that we're letting residents know of, a new hot trend in crime?
Yeah, so the relay theft technology is an emerging trend for sure. Basically, to summarize it as best I can, is you usually have a device that's capable of picking up the frequency from a key fob that's inside of your house. So someone will come near the front door or window with the device and basically is able to read the frequency from the key fob for your vehicle. And that's relayed to a second person that's near your vehicle that gets that information and can program a blank key fob for your vehicle. It can happen within a minute to two. And typically, these individuals will have already kind of done their research to know that this particular type of vehicle is parked at your residence. And so a lot of it is push start style of vehicles. We see Lexus, Land Rover, Toyota products, as well as we're starting to see F-150s. And when we review the CCTV footage, it literally is sometimes a minute or less between when they arrive and they leave with your vehicle. So it is an emerging trend. We have dedicated, as I mentioned earlier, we've taken the commercial break and enter portfolio and switched it to the residential break and enter team. So we have a team just dedicated exclusively to relay style thefts. We've had some recent success just even last week where we arrested 3 individuals from out of province. We executed a search warrant in Mississauga and recovered 5 stolen vehicles from actually throughout the GTA. So this is a GTA and really a national problem, and it has to do with the manufacturing of the vehicles that makes it so easy to take the vehicles. So in relation to the preventative steps that we're taking, years ago, we went as far as to knock on every door of someone that owned a Lexus in Oakville and present them with a newsletter with tips of how to protect your vehicle. We typically will issue a media release upon any arrest with preventative steps. We'll take proactive measures through social media just to put out blasts of tips on how you can protect your vehicle. we've kind of listed the most common vehicles that are targeted and the best ways, the most simple way you can protect your vehicle, such as parking it in the garage so it's not seen. The club, that aftermarket device just that you put on the steering wheel, is another great preventative piece. Parking a vehicle behind it, your Toyota or your Lexus or your Range Rover is another great piece. But investigatively, it is an emerging trend, and it may continue to emerge while the technology is what it is. The key ignition start vehicles are not taken, so it is specific to the push start vehicles.
Great. Thank you so much for those additional preventative measures. I just had a question about the frequency. Does it have to be in a certain range? Does it help if you put your keys somewhere further away from your front door?
It can help. There are different styles of devices. Some are better than others. There are also bags that you could put your key fob in that will help reduce the emission of the frequency signal. But again, the best methods are probably to park it in your garage if you're able to, an aftermarket anti-theft device. But the keys closer to a window or a door is going to emit a greater signal and make it easier for the thieves to be able to relay that signal to a blank key fob that they reprogram.
Makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with me and my colleagues. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks, Rob.
Councillor O'Meara. It's your turn, and then Councillor Chisholm, I believe.
Thanks again, everyone. I'll be brief. I know it's getting a little late and you guys are putting in long hours. And thanks again, Milo, for always showing up in a uniform. It has a great way of making people understand things when they don't want to listen to us sometimes. So it's always great to go over that. As you may be aware, the town will slowly be transitioning to 40-kilometer-an-hour residential streets over the next year, 18 months. One thing that we were all pretty adamant when we had this discussion was that it can't just be, you change the speed limits and people are going to start slowing down a bit. It has to be an education and an enforcement component too. So I'm hoping tonight we might be able to ensure that we can have your assistance as we move forward in how we tackle this, and particularly from the enforcement and the education side as we go through this over the next year to 2 years, because it does tend to be the element that gets people's attention, and these changes are slow, but I think they're important, so yeah, I'm hoping we'll be able to, our staff can work with you guys on some targeted plans as we unroll it, because I know that is a big component to that. So I just wanted to bring that up, as it will probably be a big thing that we'll all be going through over the next couple of years, and I know we can always depend on that. And thank you very much, Chief, for the thumbs up. That's on a recorded video, so we got it. Thank you. That's all, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm, did you have a question also?
Yes, I'll make it quick through you, Your Worship. Chief, you and I are Oakville boys, and we've seen that our police move from the 60s and 70s up to today, and amazing changes in technology and training and everything else. And my congratulations to the police force. With respect to just a couple quick questions with respect to resources, human resources in our police services. Are we up to 100% complete, or are we we're not at capacity with respect to our police force? That's my first question.
Yeah, the difficulty, we probably talked more about this at regional council, at staying at full strength are the number of different factors that can impact us. So we do have, so if we use a rounded off number of 1,000 members, that's uniform and civilian members. We do have a certain number who are off with either medical or in some cases PTSD related situations, which can be long-term absences, which we attempt to address as much as we can from a staffing perspective. Sometimes you cannot use the same salary dollars twice, as you know, in your municipal world. So we try to staff up as much as we can. The other issue that we have is when we bring new police officers, if we stay on the police side for a minute, into the organization, and we can only bring them in 3 times a year for recruit training at the Ontario Police College in January, April, or September. So we have what we often refer to as gap hiring, because we have 7 or 8 people choose to retire in the next 2 months, and we can't get the new officers in until 2 months later. It's a good, it's a positive impact in a way from a budget perspective. It helps us to absorb some other expenses, which otherwise we would be over budget in. So it helps us overall, but it's very difficult to keep the uniform side at the full complement. The board has been great over the years, and basically we can hire additional people. We're responsible for the budget ultimately, and that all works out by the end of the year, but the hiring is limited to a degree by the Ontario Police College and the timing of hires. We do have some absences on the civilian side, and sometimes when we do have absences, we try to pivot on what some of those positions were and change this position into this position that we need even more. I'll give you a good example. We were just made an offer of employment, which has been accepted by our first full-time human resource civilian director that we'll have coming and joining the service in the next month or 2. Those salary dollars aren't a budget issue because we're repurposing some other positions that we no longer need as much. Sometimes technology changes that. So it's very difficult to stay at strength, but we do have some large overtime expenses in relation to some major investigations and backfilling, which we can absorb from some of those gap absences. So it's a bit of a catch-22. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fluid. The other question with respect to staffing and officers with respect to patrol, what is the ratio of what I call in-house versus out in the field? What is the 3-to-1, 4-to-1, or I wouldn't know what that ratio is?
Well, Jeff can give you a better idea of if I simplify it to just over 700 officers, about half of those are frontline patrol related positions across the region. Then of course, if we're talking about Oakville specific, it's probably a larger percentage in uniform because some of the investigative areas are region wide, homicide, sexual assault, CASA, domestic violence. But do you have a quick number in mind for Oakville, Jeff? There's probably about 90 to 100 on platoons.
Yeah, we have about 95 allotted to our platoons, and then obviously we have some analysts that are attached to them as civilians as well. And we are a little short, but that's based on other pressures, whether that's people that are off on leaves or sickness or illness or other places like that. But in general, we're running, we have a new group of recruits coming back shortly, which will bolster our numbers certainly within a 3-month time frame. And we've hired another set that are leaving to go down to the police college now, but we'll get officers back in that regard as well. So yeah, I mean, district wide, we probably have about just over 160 in total, like members here in the district that we support. That's not including the RIS team that we have working out of this district as well, that fall under Superintendent Mahar. So as the chief said, that number is pretty much correct in regards to what the platoon staff or the frontline staff is.
Thank you, Jeff. The other question too is in relation to the municipal ward system versus the police patrol zoning. Is it the same or is it different in respects to how we do the patrolling in Oakville? Do we do it by ward, or is it just a general cost of borders for when something needs arise?
Yeah, so great question. No, we don't do it by wards, but officers do have zones that they're allotted to So when they come in for their parade, their sergeants or staff sergeants will allot them to certain zones, whether that's in the east, the west, Palermo. They cover quite a distance, obviously, but I would also say we are a regional department. So if we had a critical incident and, let's say Oakville was short or vice versa, another part of the region, we would be able to move cars from from Milton into Oakville for coverage. Sometimes that happens on major incidents where you have a critical incident that's ongoing, whether that be a barricade or a mental health crisis that we've called out lots of resources to, and it's taken up quite a few of the uniform members within the particular part of the region, let's say Oakville. We would then, I would think, stage cars from either Burlington or Milton to move up and help us out in terms of doing calls for service. So it is a regional department and everybody's prepared for that. And we do train to that level with critical incidents. So it's not something that would be new or put people sort of a fish out of water. They completely understand that on any given day or night, those are regional resources and can be moved around. And even more importantly, why we train so well together regionally, together as well across the districts.
Thanks, Jeff. Last question with respect to the zones or how the zonings are, and I assume they're all in vehicles. I've had concerns and complaints from residents saying, well, I never see a police officer. I never see a police car coming by. I always say to them, I said, you know what? Not all cars are marked with police. They're unmarked vehicles. In relation to that, just for our residents who have a concern about that, is there a percentage or compared to marked versus unmarked vehicles that are patrolling so we can give them a comfort level?
I would guess off the top of my head, for no real reason, probably about 50-50 almost. I mean, we have a lot of traffic vehicles that are pickup trucks and different things. Mark Trasso advertises some of that. We have gray Suburbans for canine, different vehicles for our tactical unit. Then we have our officers that are with our crisis rapid response people. So there's a lot. And the other thing I would say to people, and I've said this for 20 years now as a chief in different jurisdictions, even now, houses aren't built so that you're on your front porch watching to see if a police car drives by. People are in a house, usually the kitchen and the family room are at the back. They don't know their neighbors 9 out of 10 times. And then they think they have not seen a police car. So we can, with GPS technology, if we choose to, in some cases, we can say, you know what, Mr. Smith, the vehicle went past your house 6 times in the last month. You just didn't see any of those 6 times. But sometimes we're reticent or hesitant to do that. But we can say in certain circumstances that yes, vehicles were past certain addresses. But if we looked at a street, a really quiet street where nothing was happening, it's probably not the best use of that police car to be driving down that street. So we have to put those vehicles and those officers based on data analytics and priorities in different areas. So sometimes if you live on a street where you don't see a police car, that may be a good sign to some people.
Exactly. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Councillor O'Meara, you have your hand up again, and I wonder if that's on purpose? No?
Sorry, I never put it down, so I don't know. I thought it goes down automatically. I'm all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well then, Councillor Knoll, you get the honor of the last word, unless we want to go, well, no, it's too early to ask you to vote to go past the hour. Councillor Knoll, your turn.
Well, thank you for that. And that's actually was sort of my intention. I want to take just a couple moments just to round out a couple things that came up during the meeting. First of all, I want to thank the chief, the superintendent, the inspector, the sergeant, the detective sergeant for participating in this session this evening. It was very informative. We had a similar session up in Halton Hills last week, which I attended as well. Also very informative and very helpful, I think, to the counselors. And we'll be doing the same in Milton and Burlington as well in the coming weeks. one of the questions that came up was actually quite interesting, and it actually lead to one of my comments, and that is Councillor Sandu asked the question, what can we as a council do to support the police more? And I just wanted to I want to talk about something that actually was established under former Chair Burton's leadership of the police board, and that is to raise awareness of the police board and to encourage more engagement in the community, stakeholders and such. And so that's, if there's one thing that as your chairman, I can ask you to do is to become more involved in policing, really embrace the Peel principles, and the community are the police are the community, and become involved. And you can do that in a number of ways. One is, as Councillor Lischina sometimes does, is actually attend our board meetings. They're virtual now, online. They're easy to attend, and get to know what we're up to. Hear the reports from the various departments of the police, and I get a flavor of what your police board and police service are up to on a regular basis. That's a terrific resource. Our next meeting is on April 29th at 9 a.m. And you're certainly welcome to attend that. You'll always find information about our board meetings at haltonpoliceboard.ca. And you're welcome to attend, and I would appreciate that. You heard, and I also want to say one thing as well, that I'd always hoped to chair the police board at some point. I didn't expect it to happen as suddenly as it did, but I've got to tell you one thing, and it's very evident from tonight's meeting that you kept hearing, Chair Burton did this, and Chair Burton did that, and Chair Burton did this other thing. And I got to tell you, as the relatively new chairman of the board, there's incredibly big shoes to fill. There's a lot of really terrific initiatives that Rob started, and I am challenged and honored to have that opportunity to continue. And none of them is more important in my mind than really getting better engagement from the community. Now, we are a couple years away from having to go back to the community to do our regular business plan that we're required to complete on a regular basis under the Police Services Act. But it's always a challenge to get people engaged in that. So I'd like you to also start putting your thinking caps on now about the things that you'd like to see included in the next business plan when we get to that point of actually preparing that. And I'm really hoping that the engagement that I've seen tonight, the engagement I've seen in Halton, will turn into be greater engagement in that process. The last thing I want to say on this front is that another thing you can do is you can share out tonight's meeting in your social media, in your newsletters, etc. There's a lot of really good information for the community. I've kept checking the number of participants, and the number wasn't very high. In fact, it was pretty much zero. But I mean, of course, there are those that passively watch as well. But share out tonight's video, because I think there's a lot of really good information for the community to learn about what our police service is doing, how safe our community is, and just really to understand what we're up against. And the very last thing I want to say is I want to thank our chief and our senior command team at headquarters for their extremely reasoned and common sense approach to the recent stay-at-home order enforcement issue that came up and really caused a lot of us some real anxiety around some of those new powers. Chief Tanner and his team took a leadership role in this province by getting out in front of this issue relatively early, got our community reassured, and the support from our community was overwhelming in social media for his words. And I believe strongly that the combination of Chief Tanner as well as the Chief of Ottawa and a few of the other early adopters of their approach to dealing with this issue really led the province to walk back some of the more difficult aspects of this order from the Solicitor General. So I want to thank you, Chief, and to the deputies and everybody else that was involved in coming up with that position. I think your community was very grateful. And certainly as the chair of the police board and as a councillor and as a citizen, I was as well. So thank you to you for that. Thank you everybody for your rapt attention tonight. Thank you for all your questions. And I look forward to this engagement going forward between our council and our police service. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll, or Councillor Chair Knoll, or Chair Councillor Knoll, whatever it is. And thank you for the kind remarks. I do appreciate them. I wonder if I could get a mover and seconder for receipt of the presentation. Councillor Grant and Councillor Sandu, thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, the motion carries. I'd like Councillor Knoll, just for the sake of completeness, to call out the way Councillor Palmer often also attends the police board meetings along with Councillor Lischina. And
I
both,
apologize. That was on my note, and I did mean to say that. I apologize, Councillor Palmer. I've seen you on our attendance list several times.
Anyway,
my apologies. And Councillor Kearns in Burlington as well.
Well, if no one's watching, then we're pretty sure she's not seeing herself being called out. Although the one thing I would add to that is, you know, we do post this on YouTube, and it slowly accumulates, our sessions, they slowly accumulate hundreds of views. And so that means that somebody cared enough. But if you do promote the tape off of YouTube, you will drive that number up. And so thank you, everybody, for your support of the police and your interest and your good questions tonight. I wonder if now I could ask for a mover and seconder for consideration of the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Longo, thank you very much. Any objection? There being none, that's carried. Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel, I saw your hand as I was in the middle of calling the bylaws. I give you the floor, if you wanted it. Actually, are you frozen? No, I saw you move. Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel, did you have your hand up to speak or? No? Okay, thank you. Well, I don't want to make a mistake on that front, so I ask. All right, the confirmatory bylaws are passed, and that actually completes our work tonight. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention and your contributions. It's been terrific working with you, and the meeting is over.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you, sir.